see red, you can start in shortly now.
All right, I think we are ready to go then. So first of all, welcome everyone to this week's of the PTC NordicTalks webinar, and hope you all had a nice and sunny Easter break. And today we are honored by having Lisbeth Sivertsen and Bo Rixen from Econocap for a session on why requirement management in mechanical development. But first of all, if you are still new to the NordicTalks webinars, my name is Torbjörn Peterson. I'm the Partner Ecosystem Manager for PTC in the Nordics, and we are running these webinars every week, same time, where we invite customers and partners for some inspiration on any hot topics in digital transformation to see what is possible and how to make things happen. And all the past webinars have also been recorded and are to be found on the registration site. And the agenda for today is first a very quick overview of PTC by my colleague Carl from the IoT and AR team. And then our guest from Econocap will start by introducing themselves and the company, and then touch base on a few challenges regarding requirement management, how to address these, and then explain the business outcomes. And at the end of this session, we also have a Q&A session, so please keep your questions to the end. And this webinar is also, of course, being recorded and available in just a few days. So now over to you, Carl.
Thank you, Torbjörn. So PTC is a 30-year-old international software company whose headquarters is based in Boston. So we provide software mainly for manufacturing enterprises with a focus on the digital transformation. We started with CAD and PLM, and now since a few years, we introduce SaaS, IoT, and augmented reality. To you, Bo.
Thank you. And thank you to PTC for letting Econocap present here today at the NordicTalks. We're going to present you why you should consider tracking your requirements in your PLM system instead of in Word or in Excel. We are today targeting the typical mechanical development, which is relevant for companies simply developing products, and not only within medical device or regulated industries. And before I give the word to our consulting manager, Lisbeth Sivertsen, I would like to introduce you here to Econocap AS. Together with the other partners, I was a part of establishing Econocap in Denmark here in 2003, where I'm still the managing director. And we are covering Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. We're part of the Econocap group. And as you can see here on the map, we are located very close to the Baltic Sea, all the companies. We are based on values like trust, openness, and honesty, but also technical expertise. And as a result of this, 12 out of our 16 employees are PLM consultants. So we do cover most of the relevant PLM disciplines and also some of the IoT disciplines. These are learned during several Windchill implementations, I could say. So we are 100% focused on the products from PTC. And even if we know there are some other PLM systems out there, our vision is to be the preferred partner in Denmark for companies that is looking for a PLM system or IoT solutions within this smart connected product area. As a PTC partner, we have an advanced PLM status, and we are a member of the PTC's PLM VIP club that receives some extra attention regarding PLM. And now one trend we do see a lot in this is digitalization and being able to connect into the digital thread of data that is describing a product. And typically where it all starts is by defining the requirements for a new product, or you could if you are, for example, if you're OEM, you will typically get the requirements from a customer, and then you have to struggle to fulfill all the customer's requirements. And the complexity, it simply gets higher and higher. And we have seen that during the last 15 years. And then it's more and more difficult to keep track of all the requirements. And sometimes requirements, they do change, and then it's a really big task to make sure that you are fulfilling all the requirements. And if you get using Excel, it's hard to get an overview. So today, we will now show you why it's a good idea to have requirements as an integral part of your PLM system. and also how an engineer would, inside Windchill, see what requirements are relevant for this specific component. And we will show you also how the system can help you to keep track of test and validate that you are actually fulfilling the requirements as a company for a given product. But Lisbeth, maybe you could elaborate a little bit more, taking over here.
Yeah, well, thank you, Bo. So one of the things that we see is some of the challenges that the companies are bumping into. It's like complexity. There are more and more disciplines involved in development, software, all the new disciplines that are coming from new technologies. You need to have an IoT thought in your product these days. So all of this needs to be handled, and it is complex. And you get to have multiple groups, teams that needs to work together on the requirements that you have. But there are also industries that have regulations. These regulations are normally something that makes or breaks your company. If you do not comply to those, that is something that can stop your track. So you need to go get those right. Known industries that are regulated are medical device or defense and aerospace. But normal companies are also regulated. So depending on the market they're going to, they need to comply with the standards set for that market. So there are best practices that you also have to comply with. Some you set yourself, or some that comes from your customer. And then you need to make sure that your cost, your quality, and your productivity also are driving your design. And this together is something that can be quite complex to comply with. But if we look at the development end of it, so you set up some requirements for your product that often gets feed in from management. So your management set up a set of rules of what this product can do, should cover in your portfolio. So normally you would look at the market and say, well, the market needs this kind of product. We are lacking that in our portfolio. Please go and make that product. And they're also interested in, did we actually develop the product that we intended? So that's one of the input to your requirements. Seen from the system engineer's side, you have all the industry standard requirements. My example here is the ISO standard, but the problem with that is that it's changing. So you need to make sure that you know this has changed, and where would that end up changing things in your design. So the traceability between the industry standard and how you apply that down the design, on what products and where in the products was this implemented, is really something that you need to trace. So you can have company standard, as I said, but you can also have production requirements. You can decide this is going to be manufactured at this site, or you can have somebody manufacture it for you, and that sets different requirements. It can be a different level of documentation that is required if you need to be able to move things around on different production sites. All of this ends up in an extensive traceability matrix, and 400 by 400 matrix is a common size matrix for having this set. And it can be difficult in an Excel sheet, or if you have a Word document defining all your requirements and trying to trace where that is applied in. But there's also coming some requirements from your risk manager. So when you look at your risk in the product, your FMEA analysis might end up with some risk mitigations that are ending up as requirements for that product. That changes depending on how your designer end up designing your product. How did you break it down into modules? Are you solving it in software or hardware or mechanical parts? Do you have a safety bumper, or do you have a software component that stops the functionality? So all that needs to feed into the requirements, and the designer needs to take those requirements and get the design to fulfill all of these requirements. So it can be the mechanical designer, but it can also be the software designer. I think the software designer is more used to having a requirement system feeding into this, and they're more used to having requirements for modules and so on. The mechanical design is not normally used to this. They have a good idea and get to, oh, this is a fine mechanism, I like this, can we fit that into the product? So I've seen that. So that is something that you see on a daily basis. But what he also needs to sit and think about is, well, these things change. How can I make sure that I actually are up to date with what the system engineer and the risk manager is setting of requirements for my product? Well, I can go talk to them every day. Fair enough, that's cozy, but I've seen that that's not happening. You have to have either a really good process in your company to get that to work, or you can have a system where it shows up when he goes into his daily work and works on the part that he's designing right now. One of the other things that is also difficult, so I have two requirements. They're actually working in different directions. I have to figure out which one is the most important. So if it is an industry standard that sets one of them, and there's a production requirement that sets the other one, I might be able to negotiate with the production on changing this requirement. I probably can't get the industry standard changed, but I might be able to change how that was broken down in my system and how that is implemented in the different modules. So the prioritization is something that makes a huge difference when you have that. Then you can have the discussion here and make the good design where you actually have all these input in a process that makes sure that you comply with the requirements that are important. But the main thing that is always tricky, if you only see the requirement every month, or what I can call the happy occasion, the way you look into your requirements documentation, you end up with a 40-page long requirement description of your small module. Then you get overwhelmed and you haven't got a clue of what changed since last. So if you have it at your desk daily, that makes a difference. There's also the testing. All of this that was defined, the requirements, needs to be tested. and having the overview of getting the right test for the right requirement and not ending up testing something that wasn't needed as a requirement, or even worse, that you have a requirement that is not tested. That is dangerous and waste of money. So the benefit is, well, you can improve your designs, your understanding, and the stakeholders are updated all the time. You can end up building the right product, but also building your product right, meaning you have decided where you are solving the different problems by having the right model of your part in the system. And all of this can be connected to your change management system. So the next thing is the traceability. You have traceability from the point where you build your requirements, you break them down, you connect them to how your modeling was done in the Windchill modeler, and you can connect that to how that was modeled in Windchill in your mechanical build. So the assemblies defined there was built in the model. All of that is traced. You know how it is connected. Yeah, there's some compliance here that we live up to. That's really well, but what it really means that you know how it was configured and you know it on a version-based set. So you can, by having all these traceabilities, all the connections, go and investigate if there are changes. How will this impact? If I change this requirement, what do I need to go and change in my design? And go and pick only those things. And you can have an idea of how big that change will be. So your overall quality will improve, and your overview of where your problem is also more clear. Which means you will probably find the problems earlier in your design this way. But it means that you have things like requirements from Windchill RVNS. You can connect it to your model that you built in Windchill Modeler, and you can connect it to Windchill PLM and up again when you do your test. So test. One of the nice things about this, you have the breakdown that's traced all the way from your input requirement, you've broken down requirement, you can put it and connect it to your specification documentation and connect it to your Windchill. Each of these are connected to the proper test. And you can have tests that comply to the right, connected to the right level of requirement. So you do not end up doing testing at a wrong level of your setup, but you can also have standard requirements where you have standard tests, meaning you do not need to go figure out a new test every time you do it, because you have tests that are ready for your standard requirements. So you have a library of standard requirements that you can pick from, and all of this is traced. So the test engineer knows if something changed over here, he needs to go and look at his test setup, whether he needs to handle that. You also know that you're testing the right requirement and not over-testing. But also timing, are we done doing the changes? If there's a suspect link, if something here changed and this was not changed, there's a suspect link, we call it, then there's no need to go and do the testing because we are not done the development. So I just have this because this is where you can set up different kinds of requirements and have a logical build-up of those two. Just saying that making a good logical setup is important. So for the Windchill side here, you have your requirement system, you have your modeler system, and you have your Windchill where all your physical parts are represented. They're in there. Or you can have connections to other external systems, and you can have your test and validation in RVNS. My focus today is on this part. What is in Windchill for the people that are either making mechanical parts or making, for example, electronic parts? They can see their parts on the databases. So let me see. This is the interface if you're a system engineer. You're working in either RVNS or in Modeler and building all these requirements. This is not the daily life of a mechanical engineer. He would not go in here. This is not where he needs to be. This is probably too complex and he wouldn't normally find his way around here, and he doesn't need to. But this gives the system engineer a good tool to break down his requirements, and he can have all the traces visible and he can have changes. But the mechanical engineer needs to see it here. This is his day. This is where he works. He can have, well, this one haven't changed, or this can be read, and I need to look into the requirement and do my changes because there's been some requirement changes. And the really nice thing is that you can click on it and get the text directly shown to him from the system, from requirement system, because then he knows this is up to date. So this is the essential, that you have direct access online to the up-to-date requirements and you know whether it's been changed or not.
Definitely looks more simple than finding it in an Excel spreadsheet.
Oh yeah, definitely.
If you're a designer.
Really long requirement specification in a Word document and figure out whether this is the one that needs to go to my part. So the benefits, well, we have some statements here, but look at this one. New and changing requirements is actually 70% of what this survey said why you couldn't deliver on time. Because you haven't got the tracking on the changing requirements. And then the next one is lack of coordination among groups. That was what I talked about here. This is the triangle, and actually the test engineer too. Are they talking on a regular basis? So, unclear requirements. Well, if you put unclear requirements into integrity, it's still unclear, but you will probably see it more clearly that it's not been broken down to the right level. So, how do we get it?
Just one comment, Lisbeth.
Yeah.
I think one benefit more is that if you change your requirements, the system actually will help you, letting know what other requirements or what other products should be checked and is suspect to a change.
Yeah, absolutely.
And especially if you have 2,000 requirements to keep track of, which some of our customers actually do have.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It is really helpful, and the change analysis can be really cumbersome.
I think you could save a lot of time there.
Yeah, definitely. So if you want to do something like this, where you want to go in and change this, you need to handle it as a company change. You need to go in, get management buy-in. You need to do some organizational change, set deadlines and so on, and get the right people involved. But you also need to go in and look at the process you have today and start mapping the new process that you want to run. Because if you put in a paper process into a good system, then you end up with something where you're not gaining the benefits that you expected. You could do some grouping of requirements, and you would look into mapping of tests against those requirements. So getting this process right is really important. And how can you do that? Well, you can do it as we suggest. Identify your best business needs. Well, we can set up some workshops where you get an introduction to Windchill RVNS. You can map your current process. We can set up a Windchill RVNS and do some of the things that you see as your problem, and we can show you how that can be solved in the system. And that way you can start illustrating your benefits for the business. And then we can start implementing. If this looks interesting for you, that might be where you want to go in the start of your digital thread from the beginning, where you define your product, the most important part in my head. So this was my 5 minutes. Any questions?
Thanks a lot, Lisbeth and Bo, for sharing all these interesting insights. So yeah, as I said, I mean, now over to you in the audience for some Q&As. I hope you have some questions. So don't be shy and take the opportunity to ask Lisbeth and Bo here. Otherwise, I have one question actually, and that is related, I mean, to, is it actually possible to run requirement management without using PTC Windchill or?
Yeah, definitely. So if you haven't got PDM link for your mechanical design, you can still run RNS, definitely. And it will gain a lot, even because you have traceability between your requirement breakdown and your test breakdown. Well, you haven't got your link to your mechanical part, which is here to be, but it's still a huge thing to get all the breaking down of the requirements in place.
See, we have John.
Yes. Hello.
Go ahead, John. Hello.
I have a question.
Hey.
Hello.
Yeah.
So related to standard and regulations, do they have to be manual updated in the system, or do you have a license fee where you get it automatically updated?
Not out of the box. I know that there's somebody who are able to connect to standards where you can get hooks into the system.
Exactly.
So that it can be filled in. But you often also need to go and look at what that means for your business. But the overall standards can be hooked up to the system, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think we have time for a last question. Anyone would like to go ahead? Otherwise, I have one actually. And what is the most common resistance by, I mean, using requirement management?
Sometimes people think it's really complex because suddenly it becomes visible what you're dealing with. So That's often what the resistance that you have. Well, why are you making the world so complex? Well, it is complex, I'm sorry to say. But now you can handle it. Now you know where to put those requirements and face where you are going to test it and where you're going to design it. So.
I'm actually sorry to say, but time is unfortunately running out. So many thanks for everyone joining, and of course, special thanks to Econocap, listed the boom. But stay also tuned for the next Nordic Talks webinar on next week with Cognizant. We'll talk about industrial digitalization platform for a large international tools manufacturer based on ThingWorx. So with that, I wish you a really great weekend and stay safe. Bye so far.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.